Hello, everybody. Welcome to Bible class. It is Sunday, and we are studying Matthew chapter 5, the Sermon on the Mount. Right now, we're going through the Beatitudes. We're going through Matthew chapter 5, and we're trying to make it through. We're really only covering one of the statements, one of Jesus' statements per class. We looked at 2 weeks ago, we looked at blessed are the poor in spirit, those who empty themselves of ego and empty themselves of the need and the desire to be right. And it says, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Then blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. And we notice there that those people who are happy when they mourn are those people who mourn because they have sins and they make the required and the necessary corrections because of their godly sorrow that works repentance. Now we come to Matthew chapter 5, verse 5, which says, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. This word meek occurs 3 times in the New Testament. It actually occurs 4 times if you count a word that is very similar but spelled just slightly different. And this is an interesting word. If we look it up, we have to figure out what this means when it says blessed are the meek. What does it mean to be meek? Well, in order to look at that, we have to look at the other times it's used. Matthew 21:5, Jesus is actually quoting from the Septuagint, from Zechariah, I believe, and he said, Jesus isn't. Matthew is quoting from Zechariah. All this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet, saying, and in verse 5, tell ye the daughter of Zion, behold, thy king comes unto thee meek, and sitting upon a donkey, and a colt, the foal of a donkey. So there's the passage which talks about how Jesus will be meek and sitting upon a donkey. And then 1 Peter 3:4, talking about the beauty of, or the ornamentation of a godly woman is not silver and gold. It's not something that is outward of appearance. It says here, 1 Peter 3:3 and 4, whose adorning let it not be that outward adorning of plaiting of hair and of wearing of gold or of putting on of apparel, but let it be the hidden man of the heart, in that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of great price. So what is beautiful in the sight of God is not something that you put on your outward appearance, but it is that meek attitude, that meek and quiet spirit, which God considers to be of great price. Now, it's not just women who are supposed to have a meek and a quiet spirit, even though 1 Peter chapter 3 starts with, likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husband. And it talks about the wife winning the husband with her chaste lifestyle, her chaste conduct. And it says they may be won without the word by the conduct of the wives. So don't dress up on the outside to be beautiful, but instead let your pardon me, let the adorning be that hidden person of the heart, in that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit. Now there's one more passage, and that is, let's see, where is that? 4235. We have to look that up here. Matthew 11:29. Jesus says, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. So that word meek, the spelling is actually very, very similar. The three that I read before were the Greek word praus, and this one here in Matthew 11:29 is praos. So they're almost the same word, and they mean just about the same thing. But I am meek and lowly in heart. It gets really interesting when we go back to the Old Testament, and when we look at the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Now, we looked at one of those passages in the New Testament where Matthew was quoting the prophet Zechariah. But if we look at that word, let's see. If we look at that word in the Old Testament, it's really interesting. There's a passage, there are a couple of passages in Job where the word is used to refer to somebody who is poor, talking about the poor. The word occurs a lot of times in the book of Psalms. The word occurs first in the book of Numbers, I believe. Let me look for that. Let's see. We can do that search, and it'll show up in Numbers chapter 12, verse 3. And it says, "Now the man Moses was very meek above all men which were upon the face of the earth." And Moses' meekness is mentioned here because Miriam and Aaron are opposing Moses. And Moses is a man with authority, but as a leader, I think God is speaking quite he's speaking quite what am I looking for? Generously. He's complimentary. There's the word I'm looking for. Sometimes my brain doesn't sometimes my mouth and my brain don't like to communicate. But yeah, the Lord is speaking quite complimentary about Moses here when he says that Moses was very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. So we have in the New Testament, First Peter says, wives, you need to be meek, and that is beautiful in the sight of God. But here in the Old Testament, it talks about Moses, and Moses was meek, and he was meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. And you wonder, what is it that makes Moses more meek than the other people upon the face of the earth? And I believe it has to do with the position that you occupy. Meekness, you see, is not the same as weakness. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Sometimes Scripture speaks about meekness as something where as you're poor and you're downtrodden, and the Psalms especially, there are a few of them that we might look at a little bit later where it says that the Lord will save or rescue the meek. Well, they are not in a place or in a position to rescue themselves. Maybe as the poor, maybe as the downtrodden, they lack the ability to do something. They lack the ability to stand up and fight, or just to stand up for themselves. However, meekness does not always mean intrinsic weakness or being in a position where you do not have power. And I believe when the Bible says that Moses was very meek, I believe that the only way he could be meek, or the only reason that I could think of that he could be very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth, was because he was in such a position of authority. He was in a position of, well, quite literally absolute authority, because he spoke for God and he fulfilled God's command, commands as the leader of God's chosen people. So Moses, as the leader of the nation of Israel, was in the highest position of power that he could be in. He was leading God's people. And there were several occasions where when Moses found people not obeying God's law, he inquired of the Lord, and the people were put to death because they weren't obeying God's law. So Moses' meekness was not the fact that he had no power, because he did have power. He had the most amount of power among the Israelites. I don't think there was anybody who was in a position higher than Moses. If you were to put forth another person that might be in a position higher than Moses, it would be Aaron the high priest. And it's actually Miriam and Aaron in Numbers chapter 12 that are speaking against Moses because he married an Ethiopian woman. And for some reason, they didn't like the fact that he married an Ethiopian woman. Well, God took Moses' side, and, well, he had married an Ethiopian woman, but they stood against him, or they opposed him, and they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Has he not spoken also by us? So they're questioning, I guess, their own importance and their own place in things. And God actually comes down and God answers this opposition. And it says the anger of the Lord, verse 9, was kindled against them. And behold, Miriam became leprous, white as snow. And Aaron looked upon Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said unto Moses, alas, my Lord, I beseech thee, lay not this sin upon us, wherein we have done foolishly, and wherein we have sinned. Let her not be as one dead, of whom the flesh is half consumed when he comes out of his mother's womb. And so what does Moses do here? Well, Moses, who is being opposed, whose power is being, or whose authority is being questioned, he cries to the Lord. And he advocates for Miriam on her behalf. He cries to the Lord, saying, heal her now, O God, I beseech thee. And she was told to stay out of the camp for 7 days, and then when she was determined to be clean of this leprosy, she was brought back into the camp. But Moses stood up on her behalf. So Moses' meekness was not his lack of power and his lack of authority. His meekness was actually brought into the equation and brought to light, brought to the attention of the readers, when his authority is being questioned by arguably the next highest person in authority, the high priest Aaron. Yet Moses was a very meek person because he did not lord that power over everybody. And in fact, God is the one that came down and defended Moses, and his anger was kindled because of this opposition. We don't see Moses getting angry. We don't see Moses using his power and using his ability or his authority and letting it go to his head. So Matthew says, blessed are the meek. Now, there's another passage that I want us to look, because Matthew says, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And if you look through in the Old Testament at the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, you can find that same word used in Matthew chapter 5 used to translate passages of the Old Testament. And one of the passages that I found was in the book of Psalms. All right, let me see. We switch over. We search for this word. Moses was very meek. There's a few in Job. Then we have here in the Septuagint, it says Psalm 24:9, which means in your English Bible, it will be Psalm 25, either 9 or 10, because the Greek translation is a chapter off in the Psalms. It's weird like that. So we go to King James Version, and we switch to Psalm 25. This is quite a passage, too. Yes, the meek will he guide in judgment, and the meek will he teach his way. Now, this will help us understand what Matthew means, because first we looked at Moses and we saw that meekness doesn't mean you don't have power. You could actually be in the greatest position of power and the greatest position of authority possible for you. And in fact, when we see Moses, who was in the greatest position of power and authority that he could have been, he was also the meekest man in all the earth. So there must be a correlation there between how powerful you are and how meek you are. If you are in a low position of power and a low position of authority, then you are not as meek as somebody who has lots of power, yet chooses not to lord it over people, chooses not to exercise that authority in a dominating way. So here it says, the meek will he guide in judgment, and the meek will he teach his way. I love this psalm because we know this psalm. We sing this psalm. Psalm 25:1 starts by saying, unto thee, O Lord, do I lift up my soul. O my God, I trust in thee. Let me not be ashamed. Let not mine enemies triumph over me. Yea, let none that wait on thee be ashamed. Let them be ashamed which transgress without cause. Show me thy ways, O Lord. Teach me thy paths. We sing all of those verses. Lead me in thy truth and teach me, for thou art the God of my salvation. On thee do I wait all the day. Remember, O Lord, thy tender mercies and thy loving kindness, for they have ever been of old. Remember not the sins of my youth, nor my transgressions. According to thy mercy, remember thou me in thy goodness, or for thy goodness' sake, O Lord. Good and upright is the Lord. Therefore, he will teach sinners in the way. The meek will he guide in judgment, and the meek will he teach his way. So we have this poem that David writes. It says it in verse 1 there, a psalm of David. So David has written this poem, and he's lifting up his soul to God. And do you notice the message that this poem is delivering? Oh my God, I trust in thee. Let me not be ashamed. Let not my enemies triumph over me. I'm trusting in God. Defend me, protect me from mine enemies. Is David relying on his own strength? Is he relying on his own power? Is that who David was? Well, think about it. David hears Goliath insulting the Israelites and insulting God. And David is offended by this and offers to fight Goliath. And what does he tell King Saul? He says, I fought a lion and I fought a bear, and God is the one who fought for me, and therefore I defeated the lion and I defeated the bear. This Philistine I will defeat as well, because I am fighting with God on my side. Whose power is David using? Whose power does David have? Well, David is using his own power. And here he says, I trust in God. Let me not be ashamed. Let not my enemies triumph over me. Yea, let none that wait on thee. To wait on God is to trust in him and to allow God to be the one that defends. Let none that wait on thee be ashamed. Let them be ashamed who transgress without cause. Show me thy ways, O Lord. Teach me thy paths. This is somebody who is bowing down before God and allowing God to be the one that rules, allowing God to be the one that teaches. Then he says, look at this, good and upright, verses 8 and 9. Good and upright is the Lord. Therefore, he will teach sinners in the way. God is going to teach sinners, and then God is going to guide the meek in judgment. David, the king, is still meek enough to let God guide him and to let God teach him. It says the meek will he guide in judgment, and the meek will he teach in his ways. And what really got my attention is what he says here in the next couple of verses. Let me read this. All the paths of the Lord are mercy and truth unto such as keep his covenant and his testimonies. For thy name's sake, O Lord, pardon my iniquity, for it is great. By the way, if you are relying on your own power, your own authority, and if you're exalting that, you're not going to humble yourself to the point where you say, I have sinned, pardon my iniquities, forgive my sins. What you're going to say is, I am strong, I am powerful, I am proud. And we see so much pride these days of people who will not submit to God, instead rejoicing in their own power. But he says, pardon my iniquity, for my iniquity is great. What man is he that fears the Lord? Him, that man, the one who fears God, shall he teach in the way that he shall choose. God is the one that will direct him, the man that fears the Lord. Now look at this. His soul shall dwell at ease, and his seed shall inherit the earth. Oh, that sounds a lot like what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. The word inherit there in Matthew chapter 5 is a Greek word, and I won't name the word, but when we look here in Psalm 25, it's the same word translating the Hebrew. So his soul shall dwell at ease, and his seed shall inherit the earth. It's a little bit different because in what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, he says, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Here it says, his seed shall inherit the earth. But what this means is there's prosperity here. If you submit to God, and if you allow God to direct your steps, instead of saying, I am the powerful one, I am the one in charge. Moses could have said that, right? Listen to me. I am your leader. God made me your leader. You saw what happened to the Egyptians when they did not listen when I spoke. And Moses tried that one time, and it got him in trouble, didn't it? It got him in trouble. The Israelites were moaning and complaining because they didn't have water. And there were 2 times that the Israelites needed water. The first time, God said, strike the rock. And he took his staff and he struck the rock, and out came water, just like God had instructed. Then the second time, God said, speak to the rock. And Moses, it wasn't just that he disobeyed God and did not speak to the rock, but what he said right before he struck the rock as well. He said, hear now, ye rebels, must we fetch water for you, or something to that effect. Not giving God the glory, not saying God is going to bring you this water. He was frustrated. He was at his wit's end. Then he said, I'm your leader. I'm going to get you this water. There was no meekness there. Instead, he was frustrated, probably frustrated to be their leader. And then, shall we get you this water out of the rock? And then he struck the rock against what God had said, and he was denied entrance into the promised land because of that. God didn't let him cross the Jordan River into into Canaan's land, but instead he died on the other side of the Jordan River, only overlooking the land from the top of Mount Nebo. But here it says, the meek will he guide in judgment. So what kind of people are these? Good and upright is the Lord, therefore he will teach sinners in the way. The meek he will guide in judgment. The meek he will teach his way. And if you allow God to direct your paths, if you allow God to teach yourself, if you take the power, the control that we so often want to have over our lives and give that to God, what's going to happen? All the paths of the Lord are mercy and truth unto such as keep his covenant and testimonies. What is the man, in verse 12, what is the man that fears the Lord? Him shall he teach in the way that he shall choose. His soul shall dwell at ease. Now, don't you want that? Don't you want your soul to dwell at ease? And his seed shall inherit the earth. You will prosper. You will prosper if you allow yourself, or if you control that power that you have. Now, meekness, the higher the authority, the higher the power that you have over people, the greater the opportunity to show your meekness by not using your power to dominate other people and to control your own destiny. Instead, fear the Lord. Fear the Lord. And it says, the one who does this, his soul shall dwell at ease, and his seed shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Thank you so much for your attention. Next time, we will look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 6. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Until next time, may God bless you.